Burkes Law. In 1994, CBS brought back a nearly forgotten gem from the early 60s, Burkes Law. Originally airing in 1963, the show featured Gene Barry as Amos Burke, a millionaire homicide detective whose crime-solving toolkit included a Rolls-Royce, a tuxedo, and a sharp wit. The character was often compared to the suave gentleman sleuths of the 1930s, like Philo Vance, but with a distinctly post-war polish. When CBS revived the series 3 decades later, Barry, then 75, returned to the role, making him one of the rare Golden Age stars to reprise a network lead in the modern era. The reboot introduced a new twist. Amos now partnered with his son, Peter Burke, a fellow detective. That generational shift echoed a broader 90s trend of legacy storytelling, seen in series like Star Trek, The Next Generation, and The Flash. The new Burkes Law stuck to its roots. Lavish sets, noir-style banter, and a rotating cast of Hollywood veterans including Debbie Reynolds, Mickey Rooney, and Morgan Fairchild. But the show struggled to find a steady audience. Critics admired its charm, but many questioned whether its retro tone could survive in a television landscape dominated by gritty procedurals like NYPD Blue. Commentators argue the series was caught in a stylistic tug-of-war, too modern for fans of the original, too nostalgic for younger viewers. Others whisper that CBS may have hoped Barry's return would spark a wave of Golden Age revivals, but the gamble didn't pay off. After 2 seasons, the show was pulled from the schedule. Still, for a brief moment, Burkes Law stood as a curious bridge between television's classic past and its fast-changing future. The New Adventures of Superman. When Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman hit ABC in September of 1993, few recognized it as a revival of a television legacy that first took flight in the early 1950s. While the show reimagined the Superman mythos with a romantic twist, it was also a direct revival of the Adventures of Superman series from 1952, which starred George Reeves and helped cement the Man of Steel's image in early television history. Unlike its predecessor, which leaned heavily on black-and-white heroism and moral certainty, Lois and Clark pivoted toward character-driven storytelling, emphasizing the evolving relationship between Lois Lane and Clark Kent. Executive producer Deborah Joy Levine made it clear that emotional realism, not just capes and villains, was central to the show's appeal. Some watchers suspect that the shift was also a strategic move to tap into the growing audience for workplace dramas with strong female leads, a trend seen in contemporaries like Murphy Brown. Interestingly, while Ally McBeal is often name-dropped in comparisons, it didn't premiere until 4 years later. Still, Lois and Clark carved out its own space, reportedly resonating with women aged 18 to 34, an audience segment rarely targeted by superhero media at the time. Though hard data is scarce, the show's 4-season run and solid ratings suggest it struck a chord. What's often overlooked is that Superman's screen journey didn't begin with Reeves. It began in 1940, when Bud Collyer voiced the character in a radio serial that introduced now iconic elements like kryptonite and Perry White. Lois and Clark didn't just modernize a superhero, it circled back to a storytelling tradition that predates television itself. Rumors have long floated that the show's tone was also influenced by internal debates at ABC over how far to push serialized romance in a genre still dominated by action. Whether true or not, the result was a series that quietly reshaped expectations for superhero TV and helped pave the way for emotional arcs in later hits like Smallville and The Flash. The New Addams Family. In 1998, Fox Family quietly revived a franchise that had been unsettling audiences for decades. The New Addams Family wasn't just a reboot of the 1964 sitcom, it was a modern reimagining of a property that first appeared in The New Yorker in 1938. Created by cartoonist Charles Addams, the original single-panel comics were darkly humorous and later interpreted by critics as a satirical jab at mid-century American family ideals. This late 90s version leaned into the franchise's trademark gothic absurdity, layering in pop culture nods and a sharper comedic edge. Glenn Taranto took on the role of Gomez, while Ellie Harvey stepped in as Morticia. Both performances walked the line between homage and reinvention. But perhaps the most unexpected casting twist came with John Astin, who famously played Gomez in the 1960s, returning as Grandpapa Addams. It was more than nostalgia. It was a symbolic handoff between eras. Filmed in Vancouver, the production benefited from Canada's rising status as a go-to filming location, giving the series a moody, stylized look that matched its offbeat tone. Despite its short run from 1998 to 1999, the show found a niche audience, particularly among younger viewers unfamiliar with the inaugural version. Certain observers maintain that its abrupt end had less to do with ratings and more with internal shifts at Fox Family, especially as the network approached its acquisition by Disney in 2001. Whether coincidence or corporate casualty, the reboot proved that the Addams Clan, equal parts creepy, kooky, and culturally resilient, was far from finished. Dragnet. When ABC revived Dragnet in late September of 2002, few realized it marked at least the fourth major television incarnation of a franchise that began as a radio drama in 1949. The inaugural Dragnet, created and led by Jack Webb, was a cultural milestone. One of the first shows to blend real LAPD case files with a no-frills, documentary-style format that would go on to shape the entire crime procedural genre. By the time the 2000s rolled around, that legacy had faded from public memory. The new version, initially titled simply Dragnet and later renamed LA Dragnet in its second season, aimed to modernize the format without losing the franchise's distinct realism. This time, powerhouse producer Dick Wolf, best known for Law & Order, took the reins. While no direct quote confirms it, industry chatter often credits Dragnet as the blueprint for Wolf's procedural empire. Casting Ed O'Neill as Joe Friday was a curveball. Known for his comedic role in Married, with children, O'Neill surprised critics with a grounded, stoic performance that echoed Webb's original portrayal. The show tackled post-September 11 themes like cybercrime and homeland security, a notable pivot from the inaugural focus on local theft and domestic cases. Despite its pedigree, LA Dragnet struggled to gain traction. Analysts proposed that its rigid tone and procedural focus felt dated alongside flashier contemporaries like CSI or Alias. Others blame its inconsistent rollout. ABC retooled the format mid-run and shifted time slots, which may have confused viewers. Industry whispers surfaced that internal disagreements over tone and direction led to creative clashes behind the scenes. Ultimately, the show was canceled by September of 2004 after just 2 seasons. Largely unrecognized by audiences was the historical weight behind the reboot. The inaugural Dragnet had already been revived once in 1967, again with Jack Webb at the helm. But by the early 2000s, the franchise's roots had largely been forgotten. For younger audiences, LA Dragnet appeared to be just another cop show, when in fact it was a direct descendant of the series that helped define the genre. The Lone Ranger. In 2003, the Frog Network rolled out a made-for-TV movie titled The Lone Ranger, aiming to rejuvenate one of the most enduring figures from early American broadcasting. The character's origins trace back to a 1933 radio show, designed during the Great Depression to promote justice and optimism. By 1949, the Lone Ranger had galloped onto television screens with Clayton Moore in The Mask and Jay Silverheels portraying Tonto, a rare instance at the time of a Native American actor in a recurring national role. The Masked Rider's catchphrase, "Hi-yo Silver, away," became a pop culture staple. 70 years after his radio debut, the Frog Network's new retelling attempted to modernize the legend. Chad Michael Murray, then known for roles in teen dramas like Gilmore Girls, was cast as a younger, more conflicted Lone Ranger. The story leaned into origin territory, framing him as a reluctant hero, a clear nod to the early 2000s trend of morally complex protagonists. Critics, however, weren't sold. The production tried to straddle nostalgia and modern grit, but the tonal clash proved jarring. While the silver bullet and loyal sidekick returned, the attempt at stylized action and emotional depth felt mismatched. The project was intended as a pilot for a full series, but ratings and reviews derailed that plan almost immediately. Entertainment outlets described it as an uneasy mix of old-school camp and new-age brooding. Rumors swirled that the Frog Network miscalculated the cultural weight tied to the character, especially the portrayal of Tonto, which had long sparked criticism for its stereotypical framing. Others speculated the network underestimated just how hard it would be to reintroduce a golden age hero in a media era dominated by irony, serialized arcs, and darker storytelling. Despite its failure, this fresh iteration highlighted a key tension in television. Name recognition alone doesn't guarantee relevance. The Lone Ranger still had legacy, but in a landscape that favored reinvention over reverence, the masked icon found himself chasing a train that had already left the station. Kids say the darndest things. When Tiffany Haddish stepped in as host of the 2019 reboot of Kids Say the Darndest Things, few recognized the show's roots stretched all the way back to the heyday of radio. The original concept aired as a segment on Art Linkletter's House Party, which debuted on CBS Radio in 1944 before transitioning to television in 1952. The format, simple unscripted conversations with children, quickly became the show's hallmark. So popular it inspired a best-selling book series by Linkletter and eventually stood on its own as a cultural fixture. By the late 1990s, CBS revived the idea as a standalone series with Bill Cosby, running 5 seasons from 1998 to 2000. Despite its success, the show's legacy was later clouded by Cosby's well-documented legal controversies. In a surprising move, ABC revived the format in 2019 with Haddish, injecting a modern twist with references to internet culture and a more interactive tone. The reboot switched networks to CBS for a second season in 2020, but was quietly cancelled after a brief run in 2021. Observers suggest the show's frequent network changes and shifting tone made it difficult to find a stable audience. Others suggest nostalgia alone wasn't enough to sustain a format built on mid-century charm in an era of social media and streaming. Still, the enduring appeal of candid kid commentary proves that even the simplest ideas from television's early days can find new life, if only briefly, in the modern age. The Twilight Zone. In 2019, The Twilight Zone returned, again. This marked the third revival of Rod Serling's iconic 1959 anthology, a show often credited with redefining science fiction on television. Jordan Peele stepped into Serling's dual role as host and creative force, aiming to channel the same blend of eerie storytelling and sharp social commentary that made the original a cultural landmark. One detail overshadowed? Peele's reboot wasn't just a tribute. It was a calculated update, mirroring modern fears with uncanny precision. From mass surveillance to systemic injustice, the series tackled 21st century anxieties with episodes like Replay, which used a time loop to spotlight police violence. While some critics debated its tone, others pointed to the A-list cast, Kumail Nanjiani, Stephen Yeun, and Zazie Beetz, as proof of its cultural pull. Whispers suggested that Peele nearly passed on the project, wary of tampering with Serling's legacy. Legends even teased that the reboot's visual style was subtly modeled after Serling's lesser-known teleplays from the 1950s, though no official nod was ever confirmed. And while the show ended after 2 seasons, its ambition was unmistakable. Each reboot, from the 1985 version to the short-lived UPN run in 2002, has reflected its era's unease. But Peele's take may have come closest to answering Serling's original question. What's scarier, the unknown or the world already known too well? Perry Mason. HBO's 2020 reboot of Perry Mason blindsided viewers expecting courtroom theatrics. Instead, it dove into the murky alleys of Depression-era Los Angeles, recasting Mason, played by Matthew Rhys, not as a polished attorney, but as a haunted private investigator. One overlooked aspect is that this noir-heavy reimagining traces its roots back to one of television's earliest legal giants. The original Perry Mason, portrayed by Raymond Burr, aired from 1957 to 1966, and helped define the courtroom drama genre. But the character's origins date even further back, to 1933 when Earl Stanley Gardner introduced him in the novel The Case of the Velvet Claws. Gardner, a former lawyer himself, built Mason as a morally complex figure long before television softened his edges. The HBO version restores some of that grit, peeling back the mythos to explore Mason's pre-law days. Critics noted the show's meticulous production design and noir sensibility, which earned it Emmy nominations in categories like Outstanding Production Design for a Narrative Period Program. Some longtime fans were rattled by the departure from courtroom drama, while others saw it as a return to Gardner's pulp roots. Industry speculation hinted that HBO's darker tone was inspired not just by the novels, but by unproduced scripts Gardner had outlined before his death. Whether true or not, the reboot's focus on systemic corruption and personal trauma marked a sharp contrast to the tidy resolutions of the original series. Perry Mason may not have been the first legal drama on television, but it was among the earliest to gain national traction, and its 21st century rebirth proves that even icons aren't immune to reinvention. The Fugitive. In 2020, The Fugitive returned, this time as a mobile-first thriller on Quibi, a streaming service that vanished almost as fast as it appeared. Starring Boyd Holbrook as a man wrongly accused of a deadly subway bombing and Kiefer Sutherland as the relentless lawman on his trail, the reboot updated a story that stretches back nearly 60 years. Few recognize this wasn't a fresh concept. The original Fugitive aired from 1963 to 1967, with David Jansen portraying Dr. Richard Kimball, a physician falsely convicted of killing his wife. Inspired in part by the controversial Sam Shepard case of the 1950s, the show tapped into a national obsession with justice gone wrong. Its two-part finale, broadcast in August of 1967, drew a staggering 78 million viewers, then the highest in television history. The story refused to die. A short-lived CBS reboot aired in 2000, starring Tim Daly. The 1993 film adaptation, with Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones, earned 6 Academy Award nominations and a win for Jones. The Quibi version, created by Nick Santora and executive produced by Stephen Hopkins, reimagined the chase for the social media age. Each episode ran under 10 minutes, tailored for mobile consumption. Some critics praised the urgency. Others argued the bite-sized format stripped away the emotional core. Still, despite Quibi's collapse, The Fugitive stood out as one of its most ambitious productions. Some talk suggested that the franchise might see another revival, possibly retooled for streaming giants hungry for recognizable IP. If that happens, it'll mark yet another turn in a saga that refuses to stay buried, because stories about injustice, identity, and escape never really go out of style. You Bet Your Life. In 2021, a familiar format quietly returned to syndication. You Bet Your Life, this time with Jay Leno behind the desk. What seemed like a light-hearted revival was actually a direct remake of one of television's most influential quiz comedy hybrids, first popularized by Groucho Marx on NBC from 1950 to 1961. Before that, it aired on radio starting in 1947, placing its roots firmly in the post-war golden age of American broadcasting. Groucho's version thrived on improvisation, mixing off-the-cuff interviews with trivia questions and one unforgettable gimmick, the secret word. If a contestant casually mentioned the daily word, a duck puppet would drop from above, awarding them a cash bonus. The bit became so iconic that it outlived the show itself in pop culture memory. Leno's reboot leaned into that legacy, keeping the secret word and unscripted banter intact. But there were modern updates. Prize money was increased to match contemporary expectations, and the contestant lineup reflected a more diverse cross-section of America. According to industry reports from late 2021, the show maintained steady daytime ratings, a rare feat for syndicated revivals. There was debate, of course. Critics argued that Leno's brand of humor lacked the sharp edge that defined Groucho's style. Others welcomed the softer, more inclusive tone. Backstage, producers reportedly emphasized preserving the show's conversational core. Rumors even suggest Leno personally vetoed heavily scripted segments to keep the spontaneity alive. One often overlooked detail was how You Bet Your Life helped shape the DNA of modern comedy game shows. Though not the very first of its kind, its blend of humor and trivia was groundbreaking in the late 40s. Some entertainment historians speculate that its influence quietly echoes in everything from Family Feud to Jimmy Kimmel Live. Despite its long history, few recognize the reboot as part of a broader trend. Golden Age formats being reimagined for 21st century audiences. In the case of You Bet Your Life, the duck may have aged, but the punchline still lands. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.